Eric here from TI, and today we're going to talk about a really important thing to each and every one of us. There's a great variety among living things, but all living things have common characteristics. The basic unit of life is the same for all of us, no matter whether it's a human being like you and me, or a plant, bacteria, a bird, insects, doesn't matter. All living things have this same basic unit. And this basic unit allows us to carry out common activities such as growing, responding to stimulus, carrying out important things like reproducing and using energy. And the basic unit is cells. So since cells were discovered by Robert Hooke a few hundred years ago, people have been fascinated by these little structures, these tiny little structures known as, because they've become the structural and functional units of life. We have to have cells to live. And every living thing has at least one cell. And you have trillions of cells. In fact, I think the last estimates I saw that the average human adult has about 30 trillion cells. In this activity, we're going to learn about some of the tiny little structures that make up animal and plant cells and what those tiny structures do for the cell. So the cell is, you may have heard this term before, that it's this tiny little factory. There's a lot going on in a cell. And so we're gonna learn about some of those parts and pieces and a little bit about what they do today, which will build knowledge that you'll use later on when you're looking at some of the functionality of cells and then tissues and organ systems and that kind of thing. If you want to follow along in the video, that's fine. You can pause it at any time, take notes. You can go back, move forward, whatever you want to do. If you want to do this activity on your own, and it has a couple of simulations, you need a couple of things. The first thing is you'll need the software or a TI-Nspire CX graphing calculator. To get the software, you just need to go to our website at www.education.ti.com and download the software titled TI-Nspire CX Premium Software. To use this activity, you'll need to go to www.scienceinspired.com and then download the file titled Cell-ebrating Life, which is the one we'll use today. And that can be found under Life Science. All right, with that, let's get started. Okay, so I have the file Cell-ebrating Life opened up in the TI-Nspire CX Premium software. Again, you can also use this on a TI-Nspire CX or CX2 graphing calculator. This activity is going to guide us through tours of both the animal and the plant cell. We're going to look at models of both types of cells, and those are included in this lesson in sort of an interactive kind of way, which is nice. And then we're going to look at several cellular organelles and the function of those organelles. So we're going to really just kind of do a quick dive into each of the main eukaryotic cell types, so animal cells, plant cells, and sort of try to understand what's going on, what's common between animal cells and plant cells, and what's a little bit different. They're not exactly the same. All right, so I'm on page 2, and this is important information here. Cells are the structural and functional units of life. So this is something that your teacher will likely, quiz you on and make sure you understand. Structural from the point of view that, your whole body is made up of cells, and there are different cells for different purposes. So your liver has different kinds of cells than, say, your brain. Obviously, they look different, right? From an organ point of view, those are not the same things. And so even, microscopically, if we looked at the way those cells, shape and the way they look, the way they operate, they have different jobs. And so from a structural point of view, those cells help kind of define the organs and the, your skin, your eyes, everything that's going on with you. Has some specialized cells that are responsible. Functional means that these cells are carrying out important things. They're doing things. So they're creating, they're creating different hormones that your body requires, enzymes that you need to have. They're helping with growth, helping you get bigger and stronger. So there's a lot of jobs that each of the cells has to do. So structure is kind of, how it's built, what it pertains to, like I said, your brain versus your liver. Functional from the point of view of what do those cells do? What are they trying to accomplish? Okay, so all living things have at least one cell. So organisms like bacteria, that's all they have, just one. You have trillions of cells. That, like I said in the beginning of the video, average adult human has about 30 trillion cells, which is remarkable. And so cells are your basic structural unit that perform all your body's functions. Everything your body needs to do, the cells are responsible for. All right, next page. In this activity, you're going to learn about some of the parts of animal and plant cells. These parts are called organelles. So these are the little sort of specialized structures within a cell. So if I were to take a cell, cut it in half, you're going to see a bunch of these little organelles, and there are different organelles that do different things. And we're going to look at those. You'll see some commonality in organelles between plant and animal cells, and then you're going to see some things that are also different that make a plant cell, and things that make animal cells. So we're going to do some of that as well. Just a couple of questions to sort of start us off. A unicellular organism is made of, is it A, one cell that has to do all of the jobs for the organism, many cells that stay in one area but don't work together, or billions or trillions of cells all working together for the good of the organism? So uni may have kind of clued you in there that we're really just talking about one cell that pretty much does all the jobs for the organism. These can be things like bacteria. Bacteria are pretty common, unicellular organisms. In fact, you probably have some bacteria, in your gut. Hopefully you do, because that helps you do digestion and a bunch of other things. All right, question 2. Which of the following is an example of a unicellular organism? Well, a maple tree is a pretty big thing, probably has more than one cell. Same thing with a dog. But a bacterium is definitely a unicellular organism. So things like you may have heard about, like E. coli, is a pretty common bacterium that you'll hear talked about. Salmonella is another kind that you might hear in terms of food poisoning or something like that. All right, next question. What do you think is meant by the term multicellular organism? Well, you probably got this one figured out. It's more than one cell. So is it an organism that has lots of cells, one that has one cell, organism that is sometimes an animal and sometimes a plant? We're going to go with A, an organism that has lots of cells. Which cell process is performed by plant cells but not by animal cells? So cell division is performed by both animals and plants. We need cell division because it helps us grow. So the example of the maple tree earlier, those maple trees don't start off that big. They start off by seeds, and those seeds turn into many more cells. The maple trees get a lot bigger. Protein synthesis, both animal and plant cells also synthesize protein. Protein's needed by both kinds of cells. But photosynthesis is unique to plant cells. So photosynthesis basically takes energy from the sun and turns it into stored energy. Okay, so you'll learn more about that in a different lesson. All right, and finally, big organisms have big cells and little organisms have little cells. Agree or disagree? This is a little bit of a trick question. This kind of makes sense, right? Big organisms, maybe they have really big cells. Well, actually, big organisms and little organisms probably have roughly the same size cells. And there's a reason for that as well. That'll be in a different video. It has to do with surface to volume ratio, which is a really important topic when it comes to cells. There's a reason your cells are small. It's because it has to do with being very efficient and having a very good surface to volume ratio. But anyway, this answer is disagree. The big organisms and little organisms have roughly the same size of cells, just probably a different number of cells. All right, so page 9, good job. Now let's learn about organelles. So on the next page is a picture of an animal cell. We're going to move our cursor over a organelle within that cell, and we'll see a magnifying glass icon. We'll click on the organelle. We'll get it. This is kind of like a really fun way to explore some vocabulary related to the cell. But it also gives you some context with some images and sort of shows you where it might be floating around within the cell. So this is pretty, I like this activity. It's an interactive sort of way to explore names of some of the organelles. Okay, so here we have an animal cell, and the reason I know it's an animal cell is because it does not have a cell wall. Now we'll look and see what a cell wall looks like here in a few minutes when we explore the plant cell. But animal cells tend to be sort of spherical, not necessarily rectangular or geometric in that way. But like I said, when we get to the plant cell, we'll check out some of that. So the idea is we're going to grab this magnifying glass. We're going to kind of explore parts of the cell until we get this little question mark to appear. Here's one now. And a little box pops up. So if you're taking notes, this would be a good place for you to kind of pause the video. And so the first thing we see are ribosomes that are just kind of free-floating in cytosol or cytoplasm. And so sites of protein synthesis. Ribosomes are really important when it comes to making protein. And so, you may have gone to your favorite restaurant and ordered, chicken or beef or, whatever the protein might be. That's true. Those are all types of protein because muscle has a lot of protein in it, and basically you're eating the muscle from different organisms when you're ordering that stuff. And but what we're talking about here are proteins that do a host of different things, muscle included. But your fingernails, your hair, just all of those kinds of structural sorts of things start off with proteins. Ribosomes are in charge of helping make proteins that your body has to have. All right, let's see if we can find another question mark here. This thing looks interesting. Let's see what that thing is. All right, this is the mitochondria. So this is where a process called cellular respiration happens. Cellular respiration is basically, where you're creating, you're generating energy. It says that they produce ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate. This is a chemical molecule that has stored up energy, and so we use ATP to create energy. That when you're running down a basketball court or you're riding your bike somewhere or swimming, you're using up a lot of energy, and that energy is in the form of ATP. So this is an important concept. So mitochondria are known as the power centers of the cell because this is what they're doing. They're basically generating energy for you to use. Okay. The inner membrane is made of these little folds. See the orange part? Now, your mitochondria are not green and orange. This is just a sort of an animation, a representation to kind of help you see what it is. But so, don't really focus too much on the color, but do focus on the shape. So you see these little folds here. These folds are called cristae, and they dramatically increase the surface area. So we can take a small little structure like this, and by folding these little folds in this little sort of membrane thing, we're able to generate more room for more things to happen within this organelle. Okay, so mitochondria produces energy. Now let's see what this big blue foldy looking thing is. All right, this is called the Golgi Apparatus, also known as the Golgi body. And so this is a stack of these little containers, I guess, called vesicles. And those package materials that will either stay in the cell or it'll secrete things out into the cytosol. So the Golgi body or Golgi Apparatus. All right. This pink thing looks interesting to me. I want to see what this thing is here. Let's see what we got here. That's a big long word, set of words. Endoplasmic reticulum. Endoplasmic reticulum is how you pronounce this. It's also known as ER, which I like saying. It's easier. There are two varieties. There's one called the smooth ER or SER, and one called the rough ER. So it basically is the same sort of structure, this membrane foldy looking thing. But one of those has ribosomes. Remember the first thing we looked at, these little yellow dots throughout the cytosol? Those are sort of attached to the endoplasmic reticulum. That's what makes it quote unquote rough. Versus the smooth ER, which doesn't have ribosomes on it. Okay, so both of these are important because they help transport materials throughout the cell. These are sort of like your, I don't know, in a way they're kind of like your Ubers, if you will, of the cell. This yellow lemony looking thing is interesting. This is called the lysosome. Lysosome. And all animal cells have these. They're really important because they have these very powerful enzymes that sort of digest things that the cell may come in contact with. So bacteria, if there's bacteria inside of an animal cell, the lysosomes will engulf that bacteria, and then it'll just like obliterate the bacteria. Worn out cell parts that you don't need anymore. Like I said, the cells are very efficient, and so if it's no longer working or it's not needed, we're going to go ahead and get rid of it and turn it into something else that we do need. Okay, and that's kind of what the lysosomes do. They break down old cell parts, and then we can turn those things into new parts or new cell parts. Uncontrolled release of contents into the cytoplasm can cause cell death. The word for this is necrosis. Necrosis is kind of like, well, I mean, it is cell death. So if lysosomes are malfunctioning and when they're spitting out these digestive enzymes into the cytoplasm, that's going to be a real problem. And so it's important that the lysosomes work properly and don't malfunction. All right, this is an interesting little doodad. It looks like some pasta, but it's not pasta. It's a centriole. Centriole. And so during cell division, these move to opposite ends of the cell, and then they aid in sort of anchoring this spindle apparatus that's responsible for separating replicated chromosomes. So, which brings me to this part. So let's see, I'll get over there. The nucleus, this is kind of the brain of the cell, I guess. It contains DNA, which you may have already learned about, which is deoxyribonucleic acid. It's responsible for giving an organism its unique characteristics. So, you know, there's a reason why you don't look like all your friends. It's because your DNA is different than theirs, and this DNA is the blueprint of you. Your DNA makes you. It controls everything. It's basically the playbook for all things about you as a person. DNA is in every living organism, bacteria, plants, animals, you name it. So the nucleus is where this DNA is it's where it resides. It's where it stays. It doesn't come out of the nucleus, and so the nucleus is very important. During cell division, we have to make copies of DNA, and we have to make two versions of the cell, and that's why the centrioles, which we looked at a little bit ago, that's basically their role, is to help pull, to help make one cell into two cells. Okay, so that's what those are doing. And this little ball inside of here is called the nucleolus. So that resides within the nucleus, the nucleolus. And this is what produces those ribosomes. So remember those little yellow dots earlier that are really, really important for protein synthesis? They come from the nucleolus. Okay, so those move out of the nucleus and become attached to the endoplasmic reticulum. Remember that? And then rough endoplasmic reticulum, these little pink foldy things are the endoplasmic reticulum. The ribosomes attached to those and help make proteins. So protein's really, really important. Did I get all of the parts? Let me see here. Let me just do a double check here. Golgi body, remember that one? Nucleus, and then the nucleolus, lysosome, mitochondria, endoplasmic reticulum. I think I got everything there. Oh, I wonder if did we do the cell membrane? Let me look here. Almost left that one out. This one's really, really important. Cell membrane, composed of a phospholipid bilayer. So that just means that, Well, here it explains it here. The exposed heads are what's called hydrophilic, so they're not afraid of water. They don't repel water. If you've ever dropped like a couple of drops of olive oil or vegetable oil in a glass of water, you'll notice that it doesn't dissolve in the water. It sort of makes its own little sphere of oil and it just kind of floats around the water. Okay, that oil is water-fearing or hydrophobic. So the cell membrane is made of two parts. It's made of things that, hey, we like water. Those are the heads. Those are hydrophilic. They're attracted to water, hydrophilic. And then these little tails are lipids. They're like sort of like fats, like oil almost. And those make up the tails. Those are water-fearing. And so the cell membrane is really good at sort of managing what goes in and what goes out of the cell. And that cell membrane helps the cell manage that process. So you don't want things coming in here that don't belong inside the cell. And you don't want things leaving that shouldn't be leaving. But there are things that need to come into the cell that belong to the cell. And then there are also things that have to leave the cell that should be leaving the cell. And so the membrane, that phospholipid bilayer, it manages all of that. Okay? All right. Now let's jump over here to page 11. Which organelle did you not see in the animal cell? Well, we saw the Golgi apparatus. You'll remember it was this sort of blue structure made up of these sort of vesicles. We did see a mitochondria. That was that sort of sausage-looking thing over here. Remember, don't go by the color. Guys, this is just a very stylized representation of the cell just to make certain structures apparent. We did not see a chloroplast, and that is a real thing. That's not a fake word. The chloroplast is specific to plant cells, and you'll find out why here in a few minutes. All right, so let's see. Some cells in your body may have hundreds of mitochondria in them. What is one type of cell that would probably need a lot of mitochondria? So remember we talked about the mitochondria. The mitochondria are responsible for helping to generate energy. So remember when I said you might be riding your bike, going for a swim, climbing a mountain, you know, anything that requires you to exert some energy, you're probably going to need a lot of mitochondria to do that. So you may have already guessed that muscle cells have a lot of mitochondria in them. You may not have realized that nerve cells, which are known as neurons, also require a lot of mitochondria. You have a lot of mitochondria in nerve cells. Remember, the nerve cells process information. So if you put your hand on a hot stove, you really need to get that message to your brain as soon as possible so you can remove your hand from that hot stove. So you've got to feel the pain before you know that, hey, this thing's hot. So the nerve cells process those signals. That requires energy. Sperm cells are also require a lot of energy because they have to move, they have to swim to perform fertilization. All right, so those are some examples. Next page, name one type of cell that would not need very many mitochondria. All right, so things that don't that aren't responsible for moving really fast or getting you to respond to a stimulus necessarily. So things like fat cells. Fat cells help store. They help store energy, but they don't necessarily. That's energy that isn't needed right away. Also skin cells. So skin cells are very, very important, but there's not a lot of energy your skin needs to produce. And so, so those are a couple of types that don't require as many mitochondria. All cells should have mitochondria, but some cells have more than others. Okay, page 14. Some white blood cells, WBCs, white blood cells. Remember, your blood is red, and that's because it's mostly composed of red blood cells. Well, you also have less of these, but these white blood cells are very important. They're called macrophages, which means big eaters. And these cells will engulf bacteria and other disease-causing agents and then destroy them with digestive enzymes. So if it doesn't belong in your body, you can rest assured the white blood cells are going to be attacking it. And so if you have a bacterial infection, your white blood cells are trying to sort of clean house. Okay, they're kind of like the housekeepers of the body, and they float around the blood system. They find these foreign invaders in your body, and then they engulf them, basically eat them, and then spray like all kinds of digestive enzymes to break them apart. Which organelle do you think macrophages have in abundance? So remember we talked a little bit about there was an organelle that had a similar function to sort of these white blood cells. Well, so here you go, lysosomes. So white blood cells have a ton of lysosomes because they're the ones that can use digestive enzymes and break apart the bacteria that doesn't belong in your body. All right. Oops. Okay, so we said lysosomes for this one. Other white blood cells that are called beta lymphocytes make and secrete proteins called antibodies. You may have heard of antibodies. Every time the flu comes around or there's a heavy cold season, you might hear people talk about an antibiotic. Well, your body kind of makes its own antibiotics that are called antibodies, and it means basically they're against these foreign invaders in your body. What cell organelles do beta lymphocytes have a lot of? And so let's see. So beta lymphocytes, they're making proteins. Okay, there's your key word there. And so which of these organelles did we say was most responsible for helping to make proteins? So chloroplasts we haven't even talked about yet, so you can rule that one out. Ribosomes, ding ding, that sounds familiar. Lysosomes are actually made, they don't make anything, they really just destroy stuff. Smooth ER, remember we said is involved in some transportation responsibilities. It was the rough ER that helps us with some protein creation. And rough ER is rough because of these guys right here, ribosomes. And so you need the ribosomes. They help make proteins. Okay. Bacteria cells do not have a nucleus. So they are known as prokaryotes. You may remember in the beginning of the video I mentioned animal cells, plant cells are eukaryotic. Bacteria are known as prokaryotic. Okay, so they don't have a nucleus. What other cell organelle would you predict that prokaryotes would not have? Okay, so he said it doesn't have a nucleus, and you remember in that structure animation, here's your nucleus, and then the little ball there is the nucleolus. All right, so you can probably use some reasoning skills here to say, oh, okay, if it doesn't have a nucleus, it probably doesn't have a nucleolus. All right, some cells in your glands secrete chemicals called hormones, which often have to be packaged up before being sent out of the cell. Which organelle would you probably find in great numbers in gland cells? So your glands are the ones that do most of the secreting of hormones. So you've got to have these things. So you may remember lysosomes destroy things. They don't really make anything. The nuclei is just a plural for nucleus. And remember, I said nucleus is where the DNA is. But the Golgi apparatus, you may remember, is that blue. I keep telling you don't worry about the color, but then I keep referring to it as color. It's this stack of sort of these vesicles, and they are responsible for sort of packaging things up. So, like if before Amazon sends you a package, it has to be packaged up. So you can think about this as kind of your Amazon factory where they're boxing everything up before they send it out of the cell. So that would be Golgi apparatus or Golgi body.